Hello and welcome to Upstack America's Oracle BS Financials Functional Training. I'm Instructor Bob, and with me I have Victor, who is a Senior Consultant. And today we are handling Payables Lesson 10, and Victor, please walk us through.
Thank you, Bob, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this lesson in our Oracle Financials Functional Training Series. In this session, we are going to tackle the payment terms concept, which we talked about in our previous session as something that we have to create first before we can start entering invoices. So let's do a quick overview of what payment terms are and also other associated terms. So let's start with invoice due date. So first, we know what an invoice is. An invoice is basically a bill that you are sent by the supplier of the goods and services which you have acquired, and it outlines, what you amount total of what you have to pay. It might list down all the goods or services that have been provided. Okay. So with that in mind, we'll know that this bill or the invoice, it will have a due date, which is the date by which it has to be paid, by which the invoice has to be paid, the bills have to be settled. So that's the invoice due date. And then when we talk about payment terms, what are we talking about? So payment terms, which is what we are going to tackle in this session and see how to create in the system. The payment terms, they determine the due date, all right, as calculated from the term date, which we are also going to define. So payment terms, basically, they determine the length of time that you have before you have to settle your dues, before you have to pay your invoice. So we also have the payment term date basis, which basically means or indicates when the payment terms kick in. All right. So, for example, if you have an invoice that's due in 30 days, then the payment term date basis will determine when the 30 days start to be counted. Okay. So in Oracle, we can have different payment term date basis, and this can be defined at the payable system setup screen, which from where we control the supplier defaults and controls. All right. And we can have various payment term date basis. We can have the term date basis as the invoice date, which is basically the date of issue of the invoice. Other suppliers will ask you to start calculating the payment terms from the date when the invoice was received. So the invoice might have one date, but then you receive it on a different date. So the payment terms might start, the payment terms might start counting from that date from which you received the invoice. The other way is from the date when the goods were received, whatever goods or services that you have acquired from the supplier. So once you receive the goods, then the payment terms start counting from then. Or you can also have the system date, which is basically the day when you're entering this invoice in the system. So those are the various payment term date bases that we can have. And we can just go to the payment system setup screen just to take a look at where we can specify these. So I'm logged in as the correct user. I believe this is a current session. So we can just go to setup, then options, then payable system setup. Looks like the plugin is going to have an issue. Let's just try and close this. All right, so this is the page that I am talking about, where we were entering supplier information, right? And as you can see under this payment section, we have fields you can enter such as invoice currencies, pay group, and we have the term date basis, all right? And under these options, under this field, you have these options such as the system date, the goods received date, the invoice date, and the invoice received, okay? So at the moment, this is set as the invoice, which is the invoice date, and we are going to leave it as that. So this term date basis will default down to all the suppliers that are created in this particular instance, okay? All right, so let's head back to our slides and continue. All right, so we know what payment terms are, and we have said that they determine the due date as calculated from the term date basis. So what are examples of payment terms that you can have? These are not all of them, and various, companies will have maybe even their custom terms that they agree to with their customers. But common ones, you can have something like immediate, or which can also be called cash on delivery or payable on receipt. So as soon as you receive the goods, then the payment is due. All right. This is something like even when you order something like food or something like that, you have to pay immediately. Okay, so that's a payment term example, which we're all familiar with. We have others such as net 7, net 30, net 60, which basically means the amount on the invoice is due within 7 days, or it can be 30 days or 60 days. Okay, so that's what it means when you say net 7 or net 30 or net 60. You can even have net 90, depending on the particular company or supplier. So we also have others here such as 210 net 30, and can have 110 net 30 or 210 net 60. So basically what this means is that the full amount is due within 30 days, right? So net 30 that as we have talked about here. But if you pay the amount within 10 days, you can get a 2% discount. All right. So that's what this means. And this, the last one means that the amount is due within 30 days. Okay. But if you pay the amount within 10 days, then you can get a 1% discount. And I believe we saw this on the sample invoice that I showed you. Okay. Let me just. So you can see on this invoice, you have terms here, and it says 1%, 10 net 30. So this basically means that this amount, $87, is due within 30 days from perhaps the date of the invoice. But if it's paid within 10 days, then they'll get a 1% discount on the amount. All right. So those are just examples of payment terms. All right, so now let's talk about how payment terms, the hierarchy for payment terms and where you can define them or specify them. So we went to this payable system setup page where we control supplier defaults, and we saw that you can enter payment terms there, all right? So you can define payment terms and then go and enter them at the payable system setup page. What does that mean? If you enter payment terms over there, so for example, if you enter net 30 as the payment terms at the payable system setup page, these payment terms will default down to all the suppliers. Okay. Consequently, if you create a site under the suppliers, right, then the terms will also default down to the supplier site. Okay. When you go to enter an invoice, because when you enter an invoice, then you also have to specify a supplier site, then these terms will also default down to the invoice. So whatever you define here, it defaults down all the way to the lowest level of the hierarchy, which is when you're entering the invoice. However, payment terms can be overridden at any of these hierarchies. So when you're entering the invoice and the payment terms are different from what has defaulted down all the way from the payable system setup, then you can just change it and enter the correct payment terms. Okay. You can also change the payment terms at the supplier site. All right. Now, when you change the payment terms at the supplier site, what happens? Then those terms will default down in the next invoice that you enter. All right. So, for example, if you have entered an invoice under this supplier site, okay, with the terms A, and then after you've entered that invoice, you go and change the payment terms at the supplier site. That invoice which you've already entered and validated, we're going to talk about validation soon enough. The terms will not change. However, the next invoice that you enter for this supplier site, the terms will be defaulted down from whatever new payment terms you entered here. Same thing with the supplier. So for instance, you created a supplier and you specified terms here, or these terms, they defaulted down from the payable system setup, the value that you entered here. So if you create a new supplier site under this, no, so you've entered, okay, let's start again. So we have these terms which have defaulted down to this supplier, all right? And then after you've already finished this setup, you go and change the terms here, maybe to terms B. Maybe if it was net 30, now you go and enter net 60, all right? So you had already created the supplier site and the terms here are terms A. If you create a new site, then the new terms that you've entered are the ones that are going to default down to that new site that you create under this supplier. The terms that you'd already entered here as terms A will not change. However, you can go and change them if you need to. So that's basically that is basically how the hierarchy for payment terms is. It starts all the way from the payable system setup, where we define controls for all the suppliers. When you create suppliers, having specified something here, then those terms are defaulted down to all the suppliers, but you can change all these terms as required. Okay. So when you're creating payment terms, then the client or the company for whom you're doing the implementation will maybe give a list of the payment terms that they want created or specified. Okay. So now we have understood what the payment terms are, and this is the navigation to create payment terms. So we are going to create, we can create immediate terms. We can also create one of these. We'll create net 30, and then we can create one of these with the discount option. Okay, so maybe we can create the 210 net 30. So let's follow this navigation and then go and create our payment terms. So let me exit that window, then we go to setup, invoice, then payment terms. So this is the window that you get when you follow that navigation. And up here, you're going to enter the name of the payment terms that you want to create and the description. If you look here, then you will see the various tabs. You have a due tab, and then you also have the first discount, and then you also have the second discount and that discount. So you can create terms as complex as having a third discount dependent on some conditions. So we have said you're going to create immediate, then you're also going to create net 30, and we'll create one with a discount option, perhaps 210 net 30. So let's start with immediate. Let's put our name in it because I'm pretty sure there are many other payment terms that have been created in the instance. So we can call this Maskani immediate. We can call this immediate payment terms. So when we're talking about the immediate, we have said it is cash on delivery. So what does that mean? It means that 100%, okay, is due within how many days? All right, is due 0 days. You don't have days to pay. You pay immediately. Okay, so that is how you define immediate terms. All right, you can use other and you can see on this window, you can use other options. You can say maybe a certain amount is due on a certain date or day of the month. Okay, but this is how we are going to define our immediate payment terms. So 100%, the full amount is due immediately, which means you have 0 days to pay. And we can save that. All right. So let's go to the second one that we want to create, which is Maskani Net 30. And we can say this is net payment. Well, payment due in 30 days. Okay. So how do we define these payment terms? All right. So 100% of the amount is going to be due in how many days? In 30 days. All right. And that's all there is to this payment terms. There is no discount. There's nothing else that we need to define. So we just say 100% of the amount is due in 30 days. And we can save that. So the next one we want to create is the one that has a discount. So we can create 210 net 30, which means full amount is due in 30 days, but you get a 2% discount if you pay in 10 days. Okay, so let's go and see how we define this. So we start, all right, okay, we start by, make sure I've saved this, and then create new. So we can say Maskani 210 net 30. All right. Let's put the same thing in the description for this. So how do we define this? Okay. So to start off, you say that 100% is due in 30 days. Okay. That's the first part. However, for this one, you also have the discount option. Okay. And what is the discount option? You go to this first discount tab. Okay. So you can say that 2% discount you will get if you pay in the next 10 days or within 10 days. All right. So that's what you put in under this discount calculation tabs. So 2% discount or a certain discount amount depending on how the supplier has defined the terms, but you get that discount if you pay within 10 days. Okay, so that's it. If you define, okay, so put 10 there and save. Right, so that has been saved. So let's go maybe create one extra one just so that we can have a couple of options. So let's look at our slides, and we can say here that maybe we can say 110 net 60. Here we already have 210 net 30, so we can say 1% discount if you pay within 10 days, but the full amount is due within 60 days. All right. So we can come here, say new Maskani, and you can say 110 net 60. All right. All right. Let's go to the due tab. So 100% is due within 60 days, correct? But for the discount, then we have 1% discount of the amount will be given to you if you pay within 10 days. All right. So those terms have been completed and we have filled them out correctly, and we can save. I don't know why this error keeps coming up. I don't know why it keeps deleting the number of days here. So let's put 10 again and save. Okay. So now we have created the payment terms. So now when we are going to enter invoices, payment terms is one of the fields of information that we have to enter in the invoice header section. Okay. Now we will have a list of payment terms from which to pick from, because you have to specify payment terms. As we continue to learn, we will see that the payment terms now they determine the due date, and they also determine the number, the scheduled payments. Okay, it shows you which payments are due and when, as calculated from the payment terms. Okay, so now we have done, we've created the payment terms. The the next logical step is that we should be able now to start entering invoices. Okay. However, before we go there, remember in our previous session we had talked about the invoice hierarchy, and we said that to enter invoices, you first create a batch. Then under that batch, you can have one or more invoices. Right? The invoice will have one or more lines, and it goes down all the way to the distributions. But we talked about in AP, you can either enable or disable the use of batches, and we do this using profile option. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this instance is used by several people. So if we go to enter invoices, we'll be able to use batches because that profile option has already been enabled before, but I'm going to show you that profile option and how it has been set. So if we go to system admin, you go to profile, so this profile option is set at the application level. Remember the hierarchy. So you have the user, organization, then we talked about user, we talked about responsibility, application, and site. Okay. So it's either we are using batches or we are not. So this particular profile option is set at the application level. Okay, so if we enter payables here, profile option is enable batch use, I believe. So it is AP. Let me just put the word batch here and see what it brings up. Yeah, so AP use invoice batch controls. So you can see it has been set as yes at the application level, which means all responsibility linked to AP and those responsibilities have the option to enter invoices, then they have to use batches. Okay, if this was set to no, then nobody will be able to use batches. All right. So let me log back in as the payables manager. We are going to take a look at the invoice entry screen, and we are going to see some of the invoice features that we talked about and how we enter them. All right. So go to this is the navigation, invoices, then entry. So invoices entry, if you expand this entry, then it gives you these options. You have invoice batches or invoices if you're not using invoices. You have quick invoices, expense reports, and recurring invoices. So let's go to invoice batches. So first, you create a batch, give it a batch name, and you can see all the issues we talked about here. You have the control count and control amount. Control count controls the number of invoices you'll enter under this batch. Control amount, the total monetary value of the invoices that you're going to enter, and it compares with the actual that you enter. All right, and you can also see some of these other options here that you can specify at the batch level. These are optional. The only thing that you have to enter here is the batch name. Okay. So maybe we can call this batch Maskani test batch 1. Select invoices. So this is the invoice workbench page. By just taking a look, you will see some of the things that we talked about here. So this invoice is tied to operating unit Maskani developers. We have customer tax payer ID that you can enter there. That's optional. Then you have invoice type. We talked about this. We have standard invoice. We have credit memo. We have debit memos, right? We have also mixed and expense reports. So we are going to look at some of the options here, but we're going to be dealing with standard invoices a lot. You can enter the purchase order number here if there's one on your invoice. Remember, this information that's being entered here is being taken off an invoice that the user who is entering invoices, a clerk maybe who does data entry for invoices, they are reading off a paper document that they have received, or maybe it's online, or it's a document that they are reading off from, and they're entering this information, all right? So for trading partner here, for example, we created Mjengo, right? And when we enter Mjengo, it comes in there together with the supplier number. So this is the supplier. And then here we have the supplier site, which I believe we created Mjengo Jacksonville, right? Here you can enter the invoice date, which also will be on the invoice. So if you're entering maybe a current invoices, it might be you can use the date today, assume that invoice is dated today. Then you will have the invoice number, which is also being read off the invoice document. So here maybe we can say this invoice is coming from Mjengo Construction, so maybe it can have MJ in there, and then 1234, that's the invoice number. Let's put 1000 so we can start counting properly. Then you have the invoice amount, all right, the total amount on the invoice. So maybe it can be $100 for our case. You have these other options for tax, which you have not started dealing with yet. We also have the GL date, when the date that will be used in creating the accounting in the GL here. You can select. So maybe if this invoice is for 3 months ago, then if the company allows it, this user can go and enter that particular date in that particular period, all right? And we have the payment currency. We have other options here, such as distribution set, which we are going to be dealing with, all right? All right, we have terms date. So remember, in our payables system setup, we set the terms date basis as the invoice date. And for this, we have entered the invoice date as the date which I am working with today. So this is the date from which the terms will kick in. But then now you have to select the terms themselves. So let's see if we can find Maskani here. Yes, we have the payment terms that we created here. You can say maybe Maskani immediate, and this invoice is due immediately. We're also going to talk about payment methods, but some of the payment methods that are available are check, electronic, wire, and all this. We're mostly going to be using check, right? So select check there. We also have other entries you can put there, such as pay group, but all these that are left for now are not mandatory. They are white fields, okay? So this is the invoice header, right? So these are some of the information that you'll be reading from the invoice header part. So after you've entered all the mandatory information and any other information that you're going to add in this invoice header part, you can save. So just maybe a heads up, when you're using this AP module, you're going to encounter maybe some system bugs. For example, when you save the invoice header, sometimes you'll find that payment method removes itself for some reason. So you can just come back here and click save while the cursor is within that field. And it should stick now on the second time, or you can just, even when you enter there, just when you're still on that field, when you're entering the first time, make sure the cursor is in that field and click save. That should stop you from having to come back here every time. So you see you've entered the header part, which includes the amount. All right. Now, once you enter the header part, so what we've done, we've entered the batch, we've also entered one invoice, okay? So now we have to go and enter the lines. So to enter the lines, you come to this lines tab down here, right? And this is the information that you enter here. So you have the amount. So maybe if it's just one line item, then the amount will be the same as the invoice amount. If you have more than one line, then you'll split them and they'll add up to the invoice amount. Okay. So we can say maybe here we have $50, right? If there's a purchase order number, you can put it in there. And you can have the unit price and the number of items on this line. There is the GL date. So you can enter the distribution account at the line level if all the items on this line are going to one account. So remember the example I gave you using the sample invoice that we got from that we were looking at, and we say maybe the supplier has put a list of items in one line, which according to your company usually separate them in different lines. For example, maybe you are buying computers and you have 50 of them, but there's desktops and there's laptops in there. So 25 desktops and 25 laptops, okay? So maybe the supplier has put all of them 50 in one line, but when you're doing your accounting here in the company, this clerk, whoever is entering this invoice, then they have an account for desktops and they have an account for laptops. So then you can put two different distributions, but if you want to enter them in one line, you can just come here and select the distribution account, right? So let's, for example, we're doing this for Mascani developers. So what can we say? Maybe this invoice is purchasing. Can purchase assets or something under expense. We don't have very good accounts here. So maybe we can just use this fixed assets account. Maybe we are buying something such as a machine used for construction purposes. All right. And this is going for the industrial plants. Can default. Maybe you can put in the description here, something like cement mixer or something like that. All right, for $50 for steel. So if you enter this distribution account here, let's save this. Or let's enter the second line and then we'll demonstrate. Okay, so the first line is 50. The invoice amount is 100. So let's add a second line. And the second line also will be 50. And we can put another description here. What can we say? Maybe they're buying shovels or something like that. So maybe there are two types of shovels. I don't know. Maybe there's a big one and there's a small one. All right. So if you have separate accounts for those shovels, then instead of entering the distribution account here, then you go to distributions. Then now under distributions, you will enter those items. So maybe if the big shovels, they are for $25, all right, and then the small shovels are for $25, and each are going to have their separate GL account. Okay, and maybe in the description, then you can say here big shovels and here small shovels. So that's how the hierarchy goes. We are not going to create distributions for now. I'm probably going to add better accounts so that we can use distributions later. Yeah, but we can enter a distribution account here, then we'll have just one distribution. Really struggling to find good accounts to use here. So let's see whether you have an expense account for shovels. You can just use this expense account. Don't think a shovel will not be used for very long. And we can put this under the same division and default every line. Okay. So now we have entered the invoice header part, and we have entered the invoice line, and we can save this invoice. So actually, if we go to this line and look at the distributions, we'll see that only one distribution has been made because you already specified the distribution account at the line level. All right, and we can see the total is $50. So the next step to do after you have entered this invoice is to validate it. As you can see here, You have under this general tab, you have the invoice totals and all this other information, and it says here never validated. So invoice validation is a topic that we are going to look into, and but now we know how to enter an invoice and all the information that we are required to enter. So we're going to look into invoice validation in the next session. So Bob, unless you have something to add, we can end this session there.
I think we're good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.